Hello there, and I just want to, first of all, if you're watching this before spring break, kind of wonder if you're kind of crazy that you are taking your spring break time to work on the course, but hey, high five to you. And if you're watching this after your spring break, which, I mean, let's face it, is really more of like a winter break, I hope you had somewhere warm to go or at least had warm, fuzzy feelings on your time off. It's always nice to have that break, but it's also a little bit hard sometimes to get the wheels greased and back in motion. And sometimes I know you really work hard over your break to do other things. So hopefully you're at least a little bit rested mentally and are ready to hop back on and crank out the rest of this class. After spring break, it always just seems to go so fast. So hopefully we can feel like we're keeping a lid on any anxiety or angst we're having over finishing the course. And if you have questions or concerns about scheduling, about the pace of assignments, about anything with the assignments, some of you are communicating, but I'm assuming that if you're not saying anything, you're okay. And sometimes that's a faulty assumption. So would you please let me know if you're struggling at all? Okay, so we are going to move on to, we've kind of been talking about some feedback and communication, and now we're going to move on to a different kind of feedback, and that's that peer feedback and the reflection pieces. A lot of you have talked about that student efficacy piece, that part of teaching where we want young writers to look back at what they've written, revisit it, and also give peers feedback and accept feedback from peers. And this is tough stuff. We really want this to happen. We want to facilitate in our classes, but obviously, just like many of these things we've talked about, we have to teach students how to do these things. We can't just set them on these tasks. So a couple things that want to share with you this week for both experimentation and other information. And the first thing is an article from Edutopia, and it's a blog about interactive rubrics. We had one of our guest speakers speak to this, and here's another. Before I knew she was even going to give us a video about this, I had found this reading. I'm going to keep it because I think there's different ways to look at different approaches, so maybe there's a new way to think of this interaction of the rubric. I also want you to experiment with this idea of a voice thread. If you would go to just thevoicethread.com and take a look at it, it's something that I'm hoping to play around with a little bit in our class as well. And in fact, I might see if we can set something up within discussion, within a optional discussion board, so you can play with VoiceThread. Again, not a requirement, just something to look at. VoiceThread is enables you to take a mini lesson, image, anything you want up on your computer screen, have that up on the screen, your picture optional, your voice speaking through the lesson, and then anybody that you invite to the thread can add their discussion. There is an element of free and paid in VoiceThread. I'm not asking you to pay for anything. In fact, I encourage you not to. But it is a program that the free element still has some merit to it. So we're going to play around with the free because Capital doesn't have a VoiceThread paid account. But it's something just to play around with in terms of that peer feedback piece. What I like about VoiceThread, I'm just going to throw this out there, is that it makes discussions a little bit more personal, and it gives options for students if they're not comfortable with face-to-face time. I'm also going to throw out this idea. Some of you might end up doing more online teaching or blended learning than you've ever experienced in your own education. I'm involved with a lot of that type of educating educators to teach online and teach in blended flipped classrooms and that kind of thing. Sometimes I feel like we're bartenders, we're flipping, we're blending, we're stirring things up, right? So it's different ways to approach your classrooms. With that in mind, something like this tool might be a way that you could blend instruction, where students could be working on a discussion that you normally would take a big chunk of class time for, at their own pace, at their own in their own time, in their own way, and then you can revisit it in these blended environments. So just something to think about. Okay, and then reflecting the reflective writing and revision process. What were you thinking? It's an article by Sandra Giles. I will update the syllabus again to have the link. Well, actually, you know what? I'll just throw this in the course links. I won't change this again because I think that gets too tedious for you to keep looking back at it. But I'm going to add the Sandra Giles piece to the course links for this week. Okay. Discussion board this week. What are your experiences as a student editor or a student receiving peer editing? Share the good, the bad, the ugly, and suggest fixes. And one thing I want to try to move towards is practicing the things that we want to teach out. So if you want to start thinking of the blog this week as a place that you might also do some peer reviewing of ideas, or even the discussion board. I think the blog fits a little better. Think of that. Softly critical like you would expect students to be critical of other student work. That's the kind of critical that moves people forward in their writing, right? Okay, so what is the blog? Oh, let me just explain the discussion board a little bit. What are the problems that you see happening when you've been in classes where you have to peer edit, or if I just say, okay, we're going to peer edit one another, what are some of the things that come into your mind as concerns? I'll just share with you from my classroom experiences. I've taught as young in writing classes as young as 8th grade and as high as college level material, obviously, but I've also taught college writing specifically. And what I notice in having students edit one another's work, the time can feel very, like some students take it really seriously and get really down and dirty with it, and others are really flippant with it. So I have students working at different paces. That becomes a problem. Another problem is just that self-consciousness, that student who just wants to write, good job, I liked what you wrote on their peer work. And that's college students too. Students who get bad advice, like another student gives them, I just had one happen in a college class that I'm teaching online, and another college writing class I'm teaching online, and one of the students said, oh, you want to always put titles of articles in italics. And it's wrong. You want to put it in quotation marks. So how can you run interference? Some things that I would just throw out there as ideas for peer editing and discussion, or for peer editing and peer feedback, and then student reflection as well, is having students reflect on what they know to be their strengths and weaknesses as a writer, and group themselves at tables according to what their strengths and weaknesses are. So if you're really good at spelling, I want you at this table. And now everybody look in the room. If you're having trouble with spelling on your paper, make sure it goes to the spelling table. Okay? If you're really good at thesis statements, would you please put yourself here? We're going to have a thesis statement expert, and basically have, Lucy on the Peanuts gang, her little, get your counseling here for a penny or whatever, almost set up different booths. The other thing I do is I notice that some students get really comfortable with only a few students and they only ever edit together, which I believe there's some merit in. But it concerns me sometimes that they only get a narrow scope. I'll have students rotate their papers left to right. That's not rocket science. Neither is this idea. To add to that, I'll tell them on each pass specifically what they're looking for. I teach that fresh eyes concept that I've mentioned to you in the discussion board before, and I have them first look for, read it backwards, or I'll have them read it out loud to each other. I mean, just all sorts of tasks, one task at a time per pass, and every time it gets passed, they look for something different, and it helps everyone, I believe, in the long run. Okay, just some ideas for peer editing and peer feedback. The blog this week is talking about what the right time is for peer feedback and personal reflection in the writing process. Do we wait till the paper's due? I have a habit. I'm going to admit this. I have a habit of waiting till the day before they have to turn the paper, because then it's something imminent and pressing, but I'm not sure that's always the best. What tools might you use to get this done? And I didn't give you a lot of readings this week, but what are some things that you can think of that might help students in this? What would you might provide? And then obviously if you use the sources, please cite them. And I might add a few links this week too, but the ones that are in the box in the syllabus are only the required ones, the ones I want to for sure have you experiment with. And if I add anything, it will just be bonus mileage, okay? For the wiki this week, it's not due until the following week, week 9, end of week 9. Create tools students will need to complete a self-reflection or self-evaluation as well as a peer feedback session. And think about, this is supposed to be all in relationship to the writing projects, tasks, prompts, lessons that you've already created. So look back through the stuff you've created and create the self-reflection and peer feedback stuff, the materials they'll need. I think I've shown you before my feedback form, but I will load you a sample feedback form that I use for my classes that's more between me and the student, but I think you could probably see other ways to use that. And that was actually, I'll cite my source for that, and if you want to find the original source, you can look through that. This might be a thing where that's really appropriate. This task here might be something where you want to do a little bit of research online, looking at other teachers' tools. And I will, again, be loading some extra places to look. You're going to want to look at, I'm going to load Kathy Schrock's Guide to Everything this week as an optional resource link, okay? And I think you'll find some interesting tools there as well. Okay, moving on, I just want to kind of do a little bit of a look ahead on some items here. We've got one more week of the peer reflection feedback stuff, and then we're going into mini lessons. And the rest of this is all, the next three, the big chunk of 3 weeks here is all about mini lessons. And we've been a little bit, I would say, thin on teacher guest lectures about teaching elementary students specifically, and so I'm hoping by even next week, or possibly even in week 6, that I will have, week 7, that I will have a guest lecturer from a first grade perspective, and she's given me an incredible bank of tools that you can use at all phases in writing. So I'll be loading those in. I think that those will be really good pieces for you. I still said the wrong week. Week 8. This is week 8. I'll hopefully have that for you by week 8, if not by week 9, where this guest lecturer will speak about teaching writing to younger children. And she's given me an incredible resource. I think what I'm going to do is probably just put it all into one file instead of loading separate links, and let you just sort of look through her resource. But it's really good stuff. And I'm also seeing some definite, just as I'm saying, hey, you teachers of younger kiddos, make sure you look at this stuff through the eyes of an elementary teacher. Those of you who are teaching older students, some of my best writing resources through the years have come from looking at elementary teachers' ideas, because they just have a different way of thinking. Let's just take this concept, this will be kind of my closing comment today, of stations. Remember station rotation? Elementary teachers, you build your classes on that, right? And then I think we kind of forget about that when students get older. What's the last time that you've had a class that had a station? Maybe in science, I think science is better at this, but a writing class where there were stations, where there were options of places that you could go in the room and places that you had to go in the room before the end of the period was over. Here's what's cool about this, is that it really gives you an opportunity to, first of all, see which students gravitate towards which choices, but it can also help you to individualize instruction. How does it fit into peer feedback and reflection? Let me just play a scenario out for you. Let's say you spend, you have a week of writing workshop where students are writing a personal narrative. I'm just going to pull that one out. I may have used that for an example before. I apologize if I'm overusing that. So each day, the students have one focus for their personal narrative for the first 4 days of the week, Monday through Friday. Maybe character development, plot development, setting development, and then kind of a free-for-all. Or each day there are stations for each of those, and a station to conference with a teacher, and a peer brainstorming station, or something like that. I'm imagining a whole messy room full of places for students to go. On the 5th day, students know that they have to read their writing to students. This is something I've mentioned before. But how are you going to prep students to give that positive peer feedback? That's something you have to think about right now. What are you going to tell them ahead of time that they need to be asking for from their peers? What's their ask? And then what do peers need to really be valuable into their next growth in the writing process? This is just an idea of a scenario, something I've kind of